Hello, and today I'm talking with Robert Bobby Charles. Now, Mr. Charles is running for the governor of the state of Maine. He's one of many GOP candidates. Mr. Charles is a lawyer, litigator. He worked under the Reagan administration. He worked a little bit under the W administration for George Bush. He's involved in naval intelligence. He's got a book out on the topic. He grew up in Wayne. It's Wayne, Maine, right? And Bobby, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
It's wonderful to be with you. I mean, it's you did a good job there on my background. I really grew up in a little town here in Wayne. I live about a mile. I live in Leeds now, but a mile from where I grew up, and went away 10 years Navy intelligence, Reagan White House. Did Had a lot of privileges that came with just stepping up to do hard work, and now I've come home because I really feel. I mean, I came home years ago, but I really want to fix the things in this state that are broken. The state that I came back to is not the state that I left. I left a state where you could have NRA safe hunter training, and I did probably at 11 or 12 years old in our schools. We were very receptive to all the heritage industries, all the things that make us Mainers we believed firmly in. I worked for World War II vets for the first years of my life, and all of a sudden, we're looking at something that looks more communist than it does American, and it bothers the heck out of me.
Well, Mr. Charles, you absolutely do have a very extensive resume, and that's kind of what drew me to you originally. Was I was catching footage of you. I said, well, let me look into this guy, and I was like, wow, he's really going someplace for sure. You've already been places, so it's. I want to see you to succeed in everything that you do. The one thing that I want to get off out of the way first, because this is something that might be on many Maynards' minds. And
Mhm.
we all know that the moose hunt is very important to Maynards. It's
Yeah.
very important to their heritage. It's very important also to industry for tourism.
Mhm.
I heard that they're trying to do some changes on how the moose lottery works with some of the outfitters. Is this something that you care to talk about and give me your views on how that's being handled or mishandled, or what your
Yeah.
overall
So
view?
I Yeah, so I will confess I'm one of those people that never won the lottery and don't and even if I had probably wouldn't have gotten my moose. But I track it. I was up in Fort Kent. I was up in the Allagash area recently. I've listened very closely to what's going on, and I think the first thing is, and by the way, what a moose lottery it was the last time with Mills there. I mean, I must confess I watched that 3 or 4 times just because I thought it was hysterical. Look, we need to listen to Mainers first, and Mainers need to be able to have a priority in this process. I love the fact that we have a lot of out of state hunters that come in here. They're tourists. They help us. They do the same thing with deer. I think I'd have to go back and look at it, but my memory is we might cull 30,000 from the herd every year, and there's always more. In fact, there are way more deer and more moose today than there were when I was growing up. Right where I am right now, actually sitting in my house, I had a moose come through here about a year and a half ago and swam out in the lake. But I will say we've got to listen closely to those that make a living at it, as well as those who want to get their moose here. And I know, I hear all sides on that. And I guess the short of it is I'm very much in favor of the moose hunt. I want it to work for all Mainers. I want it to help us make money, but I also want it to be fair to Mainers. So I think I'll listen. The biggest thing I can do is to listen closely to hunters, listen closely to outdoorsmen, listen closely to those sportsmen with whom I've spent a lot of my life, and when time comes to make decisions on legislation, have me push it forward if there's a change to be made, and God willing, we get the legislature and we pull them in behind us and we start winning. I will say two last things that are sort of Trumpish. I will say that I look forward to a lot of executive orders on day one, a stack of them, and there may be some in there that people just. I have a stack growing on my living room table. I want to make sure we don't miss a beat in that. I like to say I'll make Trump look slow because I'm going to move fast, and then I want to be methodical. And God willing, we get the legislature and start codifying this stuff so that we don't have to worry again about nonsense.
Sure. Now, one of the things that I know about you just from digging into your background, you are a staunch Second Amendment advocate. But I want to hear from you. How much of a 2A guy are you? What is your view and stance on the Second Amendment?
Yeah, I am 100% on. I mean, I don't even know how to put it in words. I've written for years and years. 18 years ago, I helped set up a group called AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. They're the conservative alternative to AARP. I have probably written 15 articles on the Second Amendment, defending every aspect during that period of time. Right off the top, I can tell you, we're going to get rid of this red flag law. It's an abomination. I mean, my God, just the signs on my yard could create the quote uncomfortable situation that allows people to then come take my guns, and then I have to go fight for my guns again. That's not due process. It's not the Fifth Amendment. That's not the 14th Amendment. That's an abomination. And I guess I'll just say this: I feel that, and this goes not just for guns, but for everything. I think there is too much government in our face. We need to get rid of all the government regulations. We need to get rid of, and this is true in the 2A area. When we have a case like Bruin, and we have cases the Supreme Court have given us to defend where we are, and we have a government that's taken the exact opposite position. New York is, Maine is trying to take our guns away. I have a room full of guns. I mean, I don't even think about it, to be quite honest. I grew up with a room where we had a lot of guns, and I treated them as a tool, and I treated them as a recreational activity. I mean, we didn't have a lot of machines. We would fling our own clays and shoot at them, and we had shotguns, and I did get better at handguns later. Now I sleep with a 9mm beside me for obvious reasons, but I will tell you that I'm more proficient on a handgun today than I was as a kid, because we didn't really have handguns as a kid. But everything about trying to get us to hang on, let me get this call out of here. Sorry about that.
No
Am I still on there? Can we?
Yep.
Sorry. I just want to make sure I can see you there. Anyway, everything about my view of the Second Amendment is freedom oriented. I am all about expansion. There aren't limits. I mean, I don't know many Mainers that want to own a tank and a cannon, but if they do, I'm not particularly against that. I mean, I think the reality is we have some federal laws that we subscribe to, and we should. But I have had the great joy, even here in the state of Maine, with people who have the proper permitting to shoot machine guns. And I think it's a fascinating look. Those people who understand our history, and I am a particularly history-oriented person, and who understand the great outdoors and understand the role of guns in both, should be 100% supportive of gun rights, period.
Well, that's very, very to the point. And you're going to have to indulge me. I have some more questions for you. They're like
Yeah,
policy questions. Just, I think I know the answers, but let's hear them from you anyhow, because there's been a
yep.
number of legislative pushes. You just turned, there we go. Got you
There we
back
go.
there.
I'm trying to get this damn thing to work.
You're doing great. Don't worry about that. So there's a number of legislative pushes that have been introduced and are going to be introduced. So we'll start with the first one, so-called large capacity magazine bans. Stance on magazine capacity.
Yeah, I do not think there should be a limit. And here's my thinking on that. So I had tactical training. I was Navy intelligence for 10 years, but I also refreshed my tactical training. When you are, so there's multiple reasons for which we use our guns, right? One is recreation, one is just target shooting, one is, which I do, some is hunting, some is self-defense. I was always trained that if you are going to unload, first of all, if you're going to draw that weapon, you need to be prepared to use it. And if you use it, you need to empty the magazine. If we have bad guys that show up, one or two or three or five or six, I need to be able to reach into my own ability to defend myself without limit. And that's just obvious all over the country, where you have magazines that are large enough for people to be able to defend themselves against one or more aggressors. People's lives are saved. I mean, if you look at the study by John Locke and some of these others, it's very clear where you have the greatest amount of gun rights, you will have the greatest amount of stability. And that's because deterrence is a very powerful tool. Bad guys don't like to go to places where they're going to be confronted, because most of the bad guys are cowards, and the ones that aren't still don't want to be confronted. So I am in favor of leaving people to have larger magazines, because I just think it's part of what the gun was made to be used for. And we were always told empty that magazine if you are involved in an environment like that. And I did, I'm in the military, I was an expert marksman, but I have tried very hard to keep it up since. I think it's like flying. If you don't keep it up, you're not going to be, you think you are, but that's like an old memory. You need to keep it up, and you need to continue to get good at it and stay good at it. And so I still do that today, and I'm very much in favor. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I dig it. You talked about that 9 millimeter of yours by your bedside.
Yeah.
There was some pushes for so-called safe gun storage, so forced ways to store firearms. Thoughts on that?
Listen, we all should be properly trained. When we go to drive a car, we should know how to drive a car before, and we should, and when I was 15, probably getting my permit, I was taught responsibility, and all of a sudden I felt more responsible. I felt that I needed to take care on a safety level. I needed to, as well as proficiency, I needed to know what I was doing. Same thing is true with guns. What you're doing, I mean, NRA Safe Hunter training early on in life is teaching you not just how to be a good hunter, but how to be a safe hunter, how to store, how to take care of your firearms. So, I have a locker, and if there are any if there's anyone in the house that would be a problem, like kids, I will. Those are all under lock and key. But that 9 millimeter is a self protection tool, and I've made my positions very clear about drug traffickers, and I've taken helped take down the Cali cartel, and unfortunately I wish I'm very much in favor of ICE being in here, DEA being in here. We're going to get rid of sanctuary status. We're going to get, as a governor, I'm going to get coordination back between local, state, and feds. But one of the reasons we have to do that is we have about 8,000 illegal aliens here, of whom 1,400 have what look like criminal records, either significant felony criminal records, either in this country or in the country of origin. And these bad guys are around us. All you have to do is look around. You'll see them. There's Chinese grow houses. There's this, there's that. And we're having more apprehensions. We just had 4 up on the border this last week of people that, 3 of the 4 guys had Muhammad as their middle name. I'm not saying that says that they're going to do bad things, but the reality is when the 9/11 folks came over that border illegally, and these 4 came over the border illegally, they had bad intentions. So Mainers need to be able to protect themselves. I believe that, yes, of course, safe storage is very important, just like knowing how your firearm works and making sure that it's clean and making sure that you're taking care of it. But I also think that if you look at the statistics, we have large numbers of guns in this state. We probably have as many guns or more than we have snow shovels and rakes. Okay, these are tools that Mainers use, and they keep them properly, and that's why you don't see many accidents. And that's because firearm owners and users, like automobile owners and users, feel a sense of responsibility toward those around whom they operate the tool.
Okay, perfect. Now, there was a legislative push to do a lead ammunition study. Anything about that raises some flags on the play here. I think it was defeated, but I know it was something that's being pushed around, this matter of lead study.
I've seen this in other states. My view, and you'll forgive me for this prejudice, is that every time the Democrats put in a bill, and there may even be some rhino Republicans, I don't know, but anytime a Democrat puts in a bill that has firearms in it, they're looking to further restrict how we operate. And I will tell you, and again, I'm a very plain vanilla character. I don't wear a tinfoil hat. I'm not thinking that, UFOs are going to come invade us. I'm a very straightforward, everyday kind of common sense person. But I will tell you that it struck me as odd that a couple of times in the last 25 years, when there was a lot of tension and people needed to be able to be ready to defend themselves against something, and I'm not talking about the government per se, I'm talking about instability. I mean, unfortunately, bad guys move into areas where there's instability and they feel that there's not enough law enforcement. In those times, both 9 millimeter and 22 ammunition became short. And it was odd to me. I mean, those are the 2 most commonly owned firearms, 22s and 9 millimeters. And when there's insufficient ammunition, a gun isn't worth a whole lot if you can't find the ammunition to support it. So when I look at bills like the lead bill, like some of these other bills, I'm not saying that we shouldn't be thoughtful about how we arm ourselves and what we put in the guns. But I am saying that some of this is intended to create restrictions, and a restriction on ammunition is actually tantamount to a restriction on the firearm.
Right. No, absolutely. Now, I know that just recently, Janet Mills didn't sign or enact the law, but she allowed it to go into effect. And it was a ghost gun, and unserialized frames and receivers. your stance on unserialized frames, receivers, so-called ghost guns, where do you lie in that stratosphere?
Look, I mean, I am a public safety person, but I'm also a 2A person. So obviously, what I worry about is that legislators put things out there like a ghost gun law or like a red flag law, and it's either, I mean, look, even the yellow flag laws, right? They were in place, but Lewiston still happened. Okay, so if you have unaccountable, if the mechanism by which you're trying to keep people safe is really just a restriction mechanism, it's really not a mechanism that is going to create real accountability. I think you just need to think hard about whether that's worth doing. I mean, I guess I back up and say it this way. Even in New York City, look, we don't want people making what guns out of I'm forgetting what the term is right now, but the sort of out of computerized making a gun, basically a one-off gun that was used, for example, in the killing of the executive down in New York. There might be ways that you could look at how you prevent that from happening. But I'm going to always tip on the side of the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth, and the Sixth, because government finds ways to word something that looks innocuous and then to overuse it in ways that restrict rights. This is the entire lesson of the Federalist Papers. This is the entire lesson of why we have a Bill of Rights. The Constitution itself would not have existed except that they said, the states that wouldn't sign it, you needed 9 of 13 to make it real. They said, we're not going to sign it, George Mason, a lot of others, unless there's this Bill of Rights, unless these rights. And a lot of people, including Madison, said, oh, don't worry about it. These are right. No one would ever try to take our guns away. And George Mason and some of the others, I mean, at the time, very foresightful, said, no, I don't trust the concept of a growing. Don't trust it. And I don't trust it. I am, it sounds ironic, but as a governor, my goal is going to be to keep government limited. I'm going to roll back hundreds of regulations swiftly within weeks. I'm going to roll back taxes. I'm going to roll back restrictions on guns. I'm going to roll back restrictions on speech. I'm going to make it clear that the point of both the Maine Constitution and the federal Constitution is to protect individual liberties. And again, call me somebody schooled in Ronald Reagan. I worked 3 years in his White House, but I believe these things to my bone. The government will grow until you stop it. And if you don't, and I think this red flag, by the way, is an abomination. I mean, as we talked about earlier in this program, I just think you've got to be thinking in ways that are long-term, not short-term. You take of my rights away by inches, and all of a sudden you've got yards and miles.
Absolutely. So I've got like three more policy questions for you, pretty straightforward stuff. There's a bill that's moving right now that would restore the rights, Second Amendment rights to nonviolent felons. I guess what's your stance on that whole entire picture? People that
Yep.
are felons and,
Yep.
being able to have guns.
Yeah, I know you'll think this odd of me because I was a U.S. Court of Appeals clerk for a judge that was a Reagan judge and a United States Marine. And I was myself 10 years Navy. I worked with law enforcement all my life. My feeling is if you're a nonviolent, again, this is the first time, this is like first out of the box. There's no policy answer on this that anybody's talked with me about. But my feeling is if you're a nonviolent offender and your offense didn't have anything to do with misuse of firearms and you've paid your dues and you're back in society again, as far as I'm concerned, we ought to look at, maybe it's a case by case, but the presumption ought to be that a right that you previously had that was not imperiled by the offense that you were prosecuted for shouldn't rob you of the right to later hunt and make a living for your, hunt for your family. And I know people like this, by the way, and I find it very disheartening that people speak to the concept of fairness and common sense and reasonableness, but they don't do it. Right. So I am not, look, I'm a very law enforcement oriented guy. If you violate the law, you'll be prosecuted. And by the way, if you violate fraud laws in this state, which we've got some Democrats that I'm going to look closely at, I'm going to look at Republicans too, if they violated those laws. But if you violate the law, there is there is a consequence for that violation. But once you have paid that debt back, and you know what you've done wrong, and you're now in a position to, I'm not talking about cashless bail. I'm not talking about people that get released without having any consequence. I'm not talking about getting rid of mandatory minimums. These things exist for a reason. But if you've paid your dues, then we ought to relook that real close, because maybe you want to go hunting every year and you did all your life very responsibly. And maybe there was an insurance fraud issue or something that you got taken in on and you paid your dues. And I think maybe you ought to be given that right again.
Sure. Okay. Now, there's a piece of legislation that was introduced, and I don't like to make things partisan. To me, the Second Amendment belongs to everyone. It doesn't matter
Yep.
which wing of the bird it is, but just
Yep.
so happens that some Democratic lawmakers introduced a proposal for the budget where they want to add over $500,000 into the kitty to allow lawmakers, state lawmakers, to have security equipment.
Oh, it's complete bogus. Listen, this thing, thankfully, it was out of committee, but thankfully the Republicans, I believe, were able to kill it. I think were able to kill it on the floor, but there is no excuse. Look, let me start with basics. The problem is not that we're being taxed too little. The problem is they spend too much. They have doubled the size of this budget in 7 years, gone from 7 to almost 14. It is an abomination. It steals money from everyday taxpayers for things no one wants, no one can afford, and these are these pet projects. But this one was unusually egregious. They've invited 8,000 illegal aliens in here, many with criminal records, many tied to gangs. We have the major drug traffickers in this state, which just going back 10 or 15 years ago, we never did have. We have more overdoses in this state because there are more drug traffickers everywhere. So what is the answer to that? The answer is, instead of addressing those issues, getting the drug traffickers out of here, wire brushing the illegal aliens out of here, the governor decides she's going to finish a great big wall around her home. And the legislators, the Democrats, propose us paying $450,000, you and me, so that they can have a personal security system on their home. Bullshit. Okay? No way. That is not what the average Mainer taxpayer, actually, I suspect even the average Democrat taxpayer, wants to have happen. There is no, I'm going to back up again one step. The reason these things happen, the Second Amendment related incursions on liberty, the incursions on liberty tied to elevated crime, which, by the way, continue to justify opening up more freedoms for us with firearms, because we now have to defend ourselves against the illegals and the criminals that have been imported into this state, for which there's no infrastructure, who go around elevating crime. They just had an increase in crime in Bangor from 3,700 felonies to 4,100 in 1 year. Most of these, by the way, most of these shooting felonies and most of these drug-related felonies don't even get reported, because people just don't want to report them anymore. I sat down with kids in Lewiston. They said, we have drive-bys every night. Nobody reports them. They're going to track them to us, so we don't want that. And the law enforcement community can't find them anyway. So we've got elevated crime, which to me strongly supports elevated Second Amendment rights. But when you get right down to it, we've got a government that is overspending so badly that we just have to get control again. They own the governorship, the House by two or three votes, the Senate by 3 votes, all the constitutional officers, all of the DAs except for one, and the Supreme Court. We've got to reverse that. In my 4-year tenure as governor, and I'll happily make this pledge, I am going to do my best. Well, I'm not going to just do my best. In that 4-year block, all 7 of the Supreme Court justices who are on 7-year terms come due. I will replace the entire Maine Supreme Court with constitutional conservatives. Now, when the crazy people, ACLU, sues and says, you don't have this right, you don't have that right, it'll bounce right back down again. And then we begin to look into DAs like the Cumberland County DA, who looks like she may have crossed the legal line on some things herself. These are all Soros-funded DAs. And we're going to start investigating those that have claimed that it is fine to be unaccountable, that a one-party state is good. A one-party state is never good. And particularly when it's a one-party Democrat state that overspends, overtaxes, over-restricts your rights, my rights, town rights, business rights. We're really at an inflection point. We're at the point where you either assert your rights again and hold them and defend them, or you're going to live with the rights that people impose upon you, and it'll become irreversible. And I spent time behind the Iron Curtain. I know what this looks like. I am not going to let that happen to the state of Maine.
Well, when you talk about people imposing restrictions on one another. There's a rumor that there is a ballot referendum to bring a so-called assault weapons ban to Maine. So I guess what
So
go ahead. What were you
again,
going to say?
go back to the study by John Locke again. Go back and look at the Brady Bill. Okay, it doesn't work. When you take guns away from law-abiding citizens, the only people left with the guns are the criminals. That's why gun-free school zones don't work. The reason that people feel free to commit crimes in areas with guns, in crimes in areas where we are restricted from using the guns, is that they know they're safe as a criminal to use a gun in that environment. The odds are very low that they're going to end up being confronted by a gun. The reason that in some parts of the state of Maine and other parts of the United States where we have a constitutional carry, God bless that, okay? And I think we should have a stand your ground law in this state. In my memory, and I have to go back a ways, I believe we once had that in this state. But I believe that when a criminal believes they're going to be confronted, by the way, this comes from all over the world. I ran law enforcement operations globally in 70 countries, and I trained the Iraqi police, I trained the Afghan police, I helped take down the Cali cartel in Colombia. It is an absolute fact that when you have a society that is well armed against bad guys, the bad guys hesitate. And if we end up being a state where drug traffickers and others and bad guys in general say, don't try anything in Maine because those guys all own guns and they know how to use them and they will use them. All of a sudden, we become one of those states where crime goes down further, and even in cities, because people realize that the bad guys realize this is not a place we want to try to get away with something. And I'll tell you what else is happening. And I mentioned cities. Women ownership of sidearms is going up. Minority ownership of sidearms is going up. Started going up under Biden when he let all these illegals in and basically did a hands off in the major urban areas of this country. All of a sudden, people realize, you know what? You've defunded the police. I will upfund the police. You've defunded the police. You've taken their authorities away. You're persecuting them when they enforce the law reasonably. You're making them the bad guys. We want them here, okay? And if you're not going to have them here, I need to have a right to buy a gun. So now you're seeing female ownership of guns go up, minority ownership of guns go up, Democrat ownership of guns go up. I always think it's interesting that, well, not to get too deep into this, but I think Republicans probably own more guns than Democrats, and I think it's just notable that you have to assert your First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment rights, and Fifth and Sixth and others, or they get taken away from you. And I think we're finally learning that lesson again. Our forefathers knew it. Our fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers knew it. They'd gone through World War II. They knew we used to have in the early 1970s, 3/4 of all Americans owned a gun. 3/4 of all Americans owned a gun, and they were very comfortable with it. They knew how to use it. As a Boy Scout, I was an Eagle Scout at 13. I went to those camps, and we were really good. I wanted to be really good. I always wanted to be in the top 10 for the 22 competition. Right? We knew how to use guns. Nobody was worried about it. I think we're getting back to that again because people are realizing that in the end, self-reliance may be the last defense. And that's why we need to, those kind of laws that move to restrict our long established rights are laws that you have to immediately be suspect of.
Sure. Well, we're actually just about wrapped up. I want to give you an opportunity to get any messaging out there that you want to say, anything that I've left on the table that you think needs to be discussed. It could be about the Second Amendment, not about the Second Amendment, but go ahead and give me your pitch, Bobby.
I guess I'll summarize it like this. I never thought 3 years ago I'd ever do something like this. I've never run for office in my life. I've managed billions of dollars. I did train the Iraqi police. I know what it means to take on big responsibility and to do it. I fired hundreds of bureaucrats without problem. I incentivized a bunch of others to leave. I was 5 years a federal investigator. I know what it means to investigate fraud. I am a fiscal conservative. I am a conservative in just about every way you can think about it. But I also believe that in this general election, in a strange alignment of stars, the things I want to do: dramatically drop property taxes, dramatically get rid of the income tax over 4 years, get rid of all these drug traffickers that are in here, and really bring good addiction services in that make sense, not giving away needles that you have to kick away when you walk your dog, but literally bring real. I mean, there are states just like ours, by the way. South Dakota has a similar demographic. Instead of having 8,000 overdoses, they have 65 overdoses. We can get this back under control. And then I want to get our school system back under control. I want to take this woke, and they say, well, why do you use the word woke? I said, what word do you want me to use? Marxism? Whatever the word is that describes a failure to teach real hard subjects: math, reading, science, history, and instead teaching these kids to be activists and politically engaged leftists. That's not what the Maine school system was 20, 30 years ago. We were the best in the country. We're now the worst in the country. We need to stop that and reverse it. And then we have to go after all the corruption inside our own government. My pledge to you is, it is the reason I'm doing this is I am not going to sit back and watch my state become communist. I just am not going to watch it. A lot of these bills they take out of California, they scratch the name California out, put the name Maine in, and try to pass it. We're some sort of petri dish, see if it'll grow here. I think the Mainers in general, Democrats that were typical JFK Democrats, as well as independents and Republicans, they kind of are sick of it. I'm not an ideologue. I am a very straightforward, practical solutions person. And I think that's what most Mainers are, maybe even 80%. I think they also don't want boys and girls showers and bathrooms. I think maybe it's even 95% don't want that. They say it's a 60% issue. I don't think it's 60%. I think it's 95%. And I think what we're going to find, just like other times in American history, what we're going to find is that people are finally really tired of having their rights taken away to speak, to stay away from a vaccine they suspect is not good without losing their job. They want their kids protected. They want parents to have rights in schools. They want their Second Amendment rights. They want their money not to be taken from them and spent on solar panels and wind towers, when in fact that's only 5% of the state, and the other 95% of us are paying for it. They just want common sense brought back to the state of Maine. And my commitment to you is, I'm not interested in another certificate on my wall. I actually never, if I could just wave a magic wand and make all these things right, I don't need to be governor. Okay. But there is no one else out there that has the background, the proven record to do this stuff, managing billions of dollars, effectively restoring rule of law, getting after fraud, and being a pro-education guy. I realize that it's going to take the rest of my life to do this, but I am dedicated to it as a life mission because I was grown up here in this state of Maine. I do not want to see this state become something leftist, and we're headed that way real fast. So my appeal to you is go to bobbyformaine.com, BOBBYFORMAINE.com. I'm the Jimmy Stewart character in this effort, not the Mr. Potter. I don't have millions of dollars. I have more than 4,000 Mainers who've given me small dollar donations. You may be one of them. But at the end of the day, we have to do this for ourselves. All it takes for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing, as Burke said, and we cannot be those people.
Well, Mr. Charles, you've said it all. You took the wind out of my sails. Bobby, thank you so much for your time, and we'll be staying in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.